How many of you like optical illusions? Well, I have some to share with you this morning. And this is because we're going to talk about how we look at people, how they appear to us. I collected some of these that I think are very good. First of all, the one in black at the top, if you look at the black, it looks like figures. If you look at the white, what do you see? Lift, yeah. Probably some of you have seen this one already because it's a familiar one. There's the old lady with the big nose. And then if you use the nose as a face, it becomes a young woman. Can you see that? What is this one? Yep, it's somebody playing, a musician, but if you use the white part and the dark part as hair, can you see what the other figure is? It's a woman, the face of a woman. This one, I don't know which you see first, but it's two things. What do you see? Lyre. Yep, it's lyre coming down like this. But if you look at just the white part, it's a woman's face with glasses. Woman or man, I don't know which it is. And that one, what is it? Rabbit or a duck? Okay, this one is a very interesting one. It's the face of Jesus. I don't want to get in your way here, but if you look down here, if I can find the red dot, if you look down here, it's actually, get where somebody can see me, it's actually the birth of Jesus, the manger and the animals. And notice that right up here is the star. And then we come on up here and we find some people. And Jesus is probably talking to his disciples. We keep going up and we find a boat. Where's the boat? Right here somewhere. And this is the sea. And then we see a bunch of people sitting here. And here's Jesus, and here's the little boy who shared his lunch. We keep going around, and now I'm not sure I'm going to see everything. What comes next? I think the crucifixion. Here are some crosses right here. And then there's the what do you see? I'm not sure. Oh, it's when they carried Jesus' body to the tomb. And then there's the open tomb. I think that's it, unless you see something more. I don't know if I caught them all or not. Not long ago, the Wired Word group studied a Huffington Post article called "Too Pretty to Be a Nun." The story refers to Angela Speck, a college student who was planning to enter a convent and be a nun. When people learned of her plans, they were surprised and said things like, "You're too normal to be a nun," or "You're too smart," or "You're too pretty." She said that one was the one who surprised her most. They must have thought that to be a nun, you had to have acne or a big nose. Here's Angela's story. 27-year-old worked at Clinique and used Pinterest for fashion inspiration. Angela says, "People are baffled that my exterior could reflect an interior longing for a consecrated life and its antiquated vows of celibacy, poverty, and obedience. More importantly, such comments have forced me to confront my self-image and think about how I appear in God's eyes. Speck stayed for a while with the Poor Clare, as in Clare of Assisi, the Poor Clare nuns of Belleville, Illinois. I discovered that their monastery had no mirrors. At first it was a shock for a cosmetic junkie like me, but it became incredibly liberating. I felt free to be who God made me to be, and I was more fully attuned to the people around me. I could pour the energy invested in my appearance into my spiritual life. While waiting to enter a convent, she meets regularly with the spiritual director to determine her next steps. In the meantime, Speck uses the comments of people to tell them God calls everybody. It doesn't matter what you look like or where you're from or who you know. I may not look like a nun, but my heart is shaped for this vocation. My heart is shaped for this vocation. In today's scripture, God was fed up with Saul. The king was impulsive. He swore. He killed priests. He chucked spears at musicians, and he consulted a witch. Both Saul and Israel had forgotten that the real power behind the throne was God. The only reason God gave Israel a king was because they demanded to be like other nations. It was time for a change. So God told Samuel to go to Bethlehem to the sons of Jesse and anoint a new king. But Samuel said, "What if Saul gets wind of my going up there and what I'm doing?" But God said, "Tell him you're going to Bethlehem to offer a sacrifice, and when you get there, invite Jesse and his sons to worship with you." Samuel obeyed, and after the sacrifice, he faced Jesse's sons one by one. The first son paraded before him. Now Eliab was a tall, dark, and good-looking fellow. Being the oldest son, it seemed logical he was God's chosen. As the oldest, Eliab would inherit the family blessing. He was actually more mature and developed leadership skills. Eliab was especially handsome. Samuel thought, surely this is the one. But Samuel was wrong. He made a reasonable yet superficial assumption. Mortals look on the outside appearance of a person, God said, but the Lord looks on the heart. According to the medieval rabbis, Samuel did actually try to anoint Eliab, but the oil turned into jelly and it wouldn't pour. One by one, each of the other sons passed before Samuel, but God rejected them too. "Is this your entire family?" asked Samuel. "Well, all except my youngest, who is a shepherd boy. He's out with the sheep." When David was called in from the field, Samuel knew immediately that this ruddy little shepherd boy with beautiful eyes, this was the one. Like Angela Speck, David's heart was shaped for this vocation. Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed David the next king of Israel. In a sermon called "Image Isn't Everything," the writer says, "What matters to God is not the image we create, but God's image in us. God cuts through the appearances and masks we wear for each other and looks deep into the real self, often hidden under layers of makeup and material things and make-believe roles. The image of God is everything. We were created in God's image for a purpose. David was chosen for the specific purpose of leading his people with no pretense and with no resume. Each of us is chosen for a purpose that has nothing to do with fame, fortune, or FaceTime on TV. The only image that matters is God's image in us. One author says, we all have the Samuel bias. We are tempted to think that if people are beautiful, they must be interesting. If people are wealthy, they must be wise. If they show strength, they must be confident. We assume the internals based on the externals. The Samuel bias runs through all of our subconscious. eHarmony recognizes the Samuel bias in dating. Looks often shape assumptions about the rest of the person. So unlike other online dating sites, people can't see the photos of their interested matches until they have answered several rounds of each other's compatibility questions. There is an appalling story about a cowboy who entered an upscale church in an exclusive part of the city. Everyone was dressed in the finest outfits and the old cowboy had ever seen. Although the man in his clothes were spotlessly clean, he wore jeans, a denim shirt, and boots that were very worn and ragged. In his hand, he carried a worn-out hat and a worn-out Bible. When the cowboy took a seat, others moved away. He was not greeted or welcomed. No one offered a handshake or spoke to him, and they did not attempt to hide their disapproval of his attire. The preacher approached him after church and asked the cowboy to do him a favor. Before you come back again, ask God what is the appropriate attire for worshiping in this church. The cowboy assured the preacher he would do that and left. The very next Sunday, the old cowboy showed up for the services wearing the same ragged jeans, boots, and hat. Once again, the congregation showed their disapproval. When the preacher noticed his ragged clothes and boots, he stepped down from the pulpit and walked over to where the man sat alone. I thought you promised to speak to God about your clothes before you came back to church. I did, said the old cowboy. And what did God tell you the proper attire should be? Well, God didn't have the slightest idea what was appropriate attire for worshiping in your church. He says he's never even been here before. What do we learn about the story of David and Samuel? 1, look for God at work in unlikely places and unlikely people. Jesus reminds us that the kingdom belongs to the mourners, the meek, and the persecuted. Prostitutes and tax collectors were awake to God's Spirit, while the rich and religious leaders overlooked their spiritual need. Samuel learned that the work of God can happen through unlikely vessels. Where do we see God at work? Number 2, our biases, suspend our biases on appearance. When I was 9 years old, I learned something that probably doesn't belong in a sermon, but I'm going to share it with you anyway, because it's kind of on the theme that we're talking about. The story is this. Once there was a carried couple who were fortunate enough to possess a golden goose who laid I'm saying this all wrong. Once there was a carried couple who were fortunate enough to possess a goose which laid an olden gag every dingle way of the seek. Not satisfied with this look of struck, they sent the goose for a loop on the knop of the toggen and found that the inguides of this souse were the same as the inguides of any other souse. The story is, as Shake said, Spirit and the Virgin of Menace, all that golders is not glist. I almost can't say it wrong anymore. But once there was a married couple who were fortunate enough to possess a goose which laid a golden egg every single way of the week. day of the week. And not satisfied with this stroke of luck, they sent the goose for a loop on the top of the noggin and found that the insides of this goose were the same as the insides of any other goose. The moral is, as Shakespeare said in The Merchant of Venice, all that glistens is not gold. And that's what Samuel found out. The appearance isn't everything. Third, who does God give us a chance? Who does God call us to give a chance to take a chance on, or to anoint? David, the sheep tender, was an unlikely choice that day. But when Samuel got past his biases, he saw what God saw, a young man after God's own heart. I want to give you two illustrations. Dr. Paul Brandt, a medical doctor in India serving leprosy patients, said, "Each of us has the potential to summon up in others the image of God, the spark of God-likeness. Or instead, we can ignore and squelch that image and judge only on external appearance." And Mother Teresa said, when she looked into the face of a dying beggar in Calcutta, she prayed to see the face of Jesus so that she might serve the beggar as she would serve Christ. And so I leave you with this common Eastern greeting that you may have heard before. Namaste. The God in me sees the God in you.